Welcome back to the deep dive. If you're an engineering student thinking about a career in rail, or maybe you're already an early career professional, just starting out of these massive infrastructure projects, you'll know that building a railway is, well, one thing, but proving it's actually safe to open, that's a whole different challenge.
Absolutely. That moment, when a brand new, maybe fully automated line opens its doors to the public, that trust.
Yeah.
It's built on years of really rigorous evidence-based work, assurance.
Right.
It's serious engineering discipline, especially now with so much growth. Like in the Middle East, you mentioned investments over, $200 billion? The scale, the speed, the stakes are just incredibly high.
So our mission today is really to pull back the curtain on that critical process. We're going to unpack that final mile of safety assurance. How do safety professionals actually validate a system? How do they formally accept the risk? And crucially, how do they maintain absolute control over the system's configuration for decades?
And it's not, like you said, just a rubber stamp at the end. That's key. It's a continuous thing, a mechanism for reducing risk right from day one.
Okay, so it starts early.
Exactly. And that mechanism, that approach, is called progressive assurance. Look, if you wait until the very end of some multi-billion-dollar project to ask, so is it safe? Well, you've already failed, haven't you?
Yeah, too late then.
Way too late. Progressive assurance demands that continuous, incremental building of safety evidence across every single stage of the project, from the first concept right through to commissioning.
And that early integration, that's vital because it tackles something called the defect curve.
Precisely. The longer a problem, a defect, sits there undiscovered in the system, the cost to fix it just explodes exponentially.
Okay.
So by doing assurance progressively, you catch that faulty requirement or that, software bug when it's still relatively cheap to fix, when it's just on paper or in a lab environment.
Not when it's stopping trial runs just months before you're supposed to launch.
Exactly. That's the nightmare scenario. And just to give you a sense of the discipline needed, think about a project like Crossrail in the UK. Huge undertaking.
Massive.
They had to systematically manage, well over 1,000 specific assurance deliverables and keep track of something like 2,000 outstanding technical issues all through the critical phases, that kind of control. It's only possible if you move from design towards acceptance in these controlled, manageable steps.
Okay, so this continuous evidence-based approach,
Yeah.
You're saying it rests on three main pillars.
That's right. We're diving into validation, acceptance, and configuration management.
All right. Let's jump into the first one then. Validation. And you mentioned there's a key distinction here that often trips people up. Verification versus validation.
Yes, absolutely. We really need to nail this difference down.
Yeah.
Are we building the system right versus are we building the right system?
Okay.
Let's use an analogy. Maybe building a house or even baking a cake, maybe a really specific technical cake.
Okay, I like cake. Is this a SIL 4-rated chocolate cake we're talking about? Let's say it is. So, verification. That's asking, did we build the system right? Did we follow the recipe exactly?
Right.
Ticking the boxes.
Pretty much. Did we check the outputs of this stage against the requirements from the last stage? For our cake, verification is checking you used exactly 500 grams of flour, mixed it for precisely 3 minutes, baked it at the exact temperature in the recipe.
Got it.
In railway engineering, this means things like design reviews, unit testing, making sure, say, the signaling equipment complies precisely with the technical specs in the contract.
So verification is all about that internal consistency, checking against the detailed plan, the specs. But, okay, even if you follow the recipe perfectly, how do you know the cake actually tastes good? Or that the house works for the people living in it?
Exactly. That's where validation comes in.
Okay. Validation asks the big question. Did we build the right system? Does the cake taste good? Does the house actually meet the user's real operational needs? For railways, validation is about proving the system works safely and effectively out there in the real, often messy operational world. So less lab, more real world.
Much more. We're talking serious trial running, field testing under realistic stress, proving the whole thing, trains, power, signaling all interfaces smoothly and actually does what it's supposed to do. Move passengers safely from A to B.
In this whole V&V thing, verification, validation, it's not just good practice, is it? It's actually required.
Oh, absolutely. It's mandated across the entire life cycle, driven by standards everyone uses, like the European CNLEC framework, specifically EN 50126. It has to be continuous from start to finish.
Okay.
And all this evidence gathering from those early design checks right through to the final field trials, it all flows into the safety case.
The safety case.
Yes.
That's the big formal argument, isn't it?
Exactly. It's the structured, formal, auditable argument that proves the system is safe for its intended purpose. And it really is an argument. It's not just dumping a load of data. You have to connect the dots.
Let's talk about that structure then. Because if you're building that argument, you need to know the framework. You mentioned EN 50129 often standardizes this. It has, 6 parts typically? Can you walk us through the core ones?
Especially the technical meat of it.
Sure. It kicks off with part 1, definition of the system. Sounds simple, but it's fundamental. You have to clearly define the scope, the boundaries, the operational limits of exactly what system you're assessing, what's in, what's out. Crucial first step. Then you get into how you built it, right? Not just what.
Correct. Part 2 is the quality management report. This shows you used systematic quality control processes, often something like ISO 9000 or no. It gives the regulator confidence that your development process itself, how you handled documents, design changes, suppliers, was controlled. Minimize the chances of human error creeping in.
Okay, process quality.
Then Part 3 covers safety management. This demonstrates you followed systematic steps for finding hazards and managing risks throughout the design lifecycle. It tracks the journey of every single hazard you identified.
And the real technical proof.
Yeah.
That lives in part 4, the technical safety report. This is the engine room, really. It holds your hard evidence, the hazard logs, the formal safety analyses, and the results of really rigorous techniques like FMECA and the determination of safety integrity levels, SILs. Okay, hang on. Let's pause there. FMECA, failure modes and effects analysis. For listeners maybe new to this, what exactly is that and why is it so critical for part 4?
Right, good point. FMECA is a foundational tool. It's very systematic. You basically take every component, could be a sensor, a circuit board, even a line of software code, and you ask, how could this possibly fail? That's the mode of failure. Then, what happens if it fails? That's the effect. And finally, what can we do about it? How can we mitigate that risk? This whole analysis helps engineers pinpoint single points of failure, design and redundancy. It's absolutely critical because the severity of that failure effect directly tells you what safety integrity level, or SIL, you need to assign to that safety function.
So the SIL rating comes directly out of that risk analysis. It basically defines how utterly reliable that safety function has to be.
Precisely. And the rest of the safety case kind of wraps up this argument. Part 5 deals with relationships with other safety cases. Really important in complex projects where, say, your new signaling system has to safely talk to an older power system, or trains from a totally different manufacturer. Integration complexity really lives here.
Yeah, interfaces are always tricky.
Always. And then finally, Part 6 is the summary and conclusion. This gives that clear, high-level, defensible argument for why the system should be accepted as safe.
It sounds like a really solid, almost foolproof process on paper. But, well, experience shows projects still get tripped up all the time, even with this framework. You mentioned a list of common V&V pitfalls. Let's dig into those. Where do things go wrong in practice?
We absolutely have to, because knowing the framework is one thing, right? Avoiding the real-world mistakes is another game entirely. One of the biggest pitfalls we see is what we call the documentation trap.
Okay.
Starting with poor requirements. Ambiguous, incomplete. If your requirement just says the train control system must be reliable, well, how on earth do you test that? You can't validate success if you haven't defined success clearly and measurably in the first place.
Yeah, vague requirements lead to vague testing. Makes sense. And linked to that, you mentioned the late rush.
Yes. The tendency for engineering teams to kind of push V&V activities towards the end, thinking, oh, testing is just the final step before we deliver.
Big mistake.
Huge. The longer you wait to find a defect, the cost just skyrockets. Finding something during site testing or trial running, it can cost hundreds, literally hundreds of times more to fix than if you caught it back during a design review. That's why that progressive approach isn't just nice to have, it's non-negotiable economically too. Okay. Then there's the one everyone dreads. Underestimating integration complexity, where things that worked perfectly fine in the lab suddenly start, well, fighting each other out in the real system. It's a massive challenge across the industry. Crossrail, again, is probably the textbook example here. They originally planned something like 15 months for their system integration testing. It actually took 30 months, double. Why? Not because the tunnels weren't ready, but because of immense interface complexity. Software iterations between the dozens of contractors, unexpected electromagnetic compatibility issues between new kit and old infrastructure. Integration is very often the single biggest risk to the project's schedule.
Wow, double the time.
Yeah.
Okay, another pitfall you mentioned was about requirements changing. Requirements drift.
Yes. This happens all the time. The original requirement might shift, maybe for budget reasons, or a new technology comes along, or the operators have a new idea about how they want things to work.
Right.
If the validation team is still testing against the old baseline, version 1.0, while the development team is building to the new version 1.1, the whole safety case falls apart. You absolutely need strong traceability, linking every test result back to the current approved version of the requirement.
Traceability again. Seems key. What about relying too much on your own team? Insufficient independent assessment.
That's a huge blind spot. You need that objective pair of eyes. When a team's been living and breathing a design for, say, 5 years, they inevitably develop blind spots. They know how it's supposed to work.
Right.
The independent safety assessor, the ISA, they need to be brought in early and kept involved throughout. Doha Metro is a great example here again. They had their ISA engaged right from 2012 all the way through to service in 2019. That gives continuous, really knowledgeable oversight.
That long-term view must be invaluable. What about the human side of things? Do engineers sometimes forget about the operators?
Absolutely. That leads to poor human factors integration. It's easy to overlook. Does the system work well when the operator is tired, stressed, under pressure? Validation must include realistic operational scenarios. Make sure that driver interface or maintainer interface is intuitive and genuinely fail-safe, not just technically compliant on paper.
And the trap of just doing lots of tests rather than the right tests.
That's the testing trap, focusing on quantity over quality, or maybe the wrong kind of quantity. Sometimes engineers might prioritize, say, running thousands of unit tests on individual software modules, while maybe neglecting the really critical end-to-end performance tests that simulate the absolute worst-case scenarios. Validation needs to really focus on those stressful boundary conditions, the potential failure modes, not just the easy sunny day operations. Okay, 2 more quick ones from that list. Ignoring constraints and maybe trusting suppliers too much. Yes, ignoring operational constraints is a big risk. Your validation might prove a train can run perfectly safely at 160 kilometers per hour. Great. But if the actual track environment, the curves, the gradients, maybe local weather limits, only allow 140, then your validation has missed a critical piece of the real operational content.
Right, context matters.
Hugely. And yes, reliance on unverified vendor data. You absolutely have to validate your supplier's claims yourself or have robust evidence they did it properly. You can't just take a vendor's test certificate at face value and assume it covers your specific application and integration risks. Your safety case, your argument has to own the evidence. You're the one ultimately responsible. That's a really comprehensive rundown of where V&V can go wrong. And it leads perfectly into our next pillar, configuration management. Because even if you nail V&V, get the system open flawlessly. Railways change, they evolve. If you don't manage that change meticulously, all that safety assurance work can just decay over time. Exactly. Configuration management, or CM, is that discipline framework. It's what ensures the railway system stays stable, safe, and properly documented throughout its entire life, which could easily be 40 years or more. Systems are never really finished. They're just at a specific known baseline at any point in time. CM prevents that dangerous, undocumented drift away from the safe baseline.
Okay, so if something needs an update, maybe a software patch gets released, or a physical part like a track switch needs replacing, how does CM provide that control? You said it breaks down into 4 basic functions.
That's right, 4 key functions. The starting point is configuration identification. You have to establish unique identifiers for every single safety-critical item. Everything from, say, a physical track component right down to the precise firmware version running on the interlocking system.
Okay, tag everything.
Essentially, yes. And define clear, agreed baselines at major project milestones. You can't identify something uniquely, you fundamentally can't control it.
Makes sense. Once it's identified, then you control it. Function 2. Configuration control. This is the governance part, the rules. No modification, no change at all, physical or digital, can happen without going through a formal evaluation and approval process. The change control procedure. It's like a safety firewall against informal, quick fixes. Got it. No shortcuts. New shortcuts. 3 is configuration status accounting. This is the tracking function. It needs to answer those critical real-time questions like, which specific approved software patch is running right now on the train protection system on line 3, and exactly when was it deployed? It provides that essential history, that current traceability, okay, knowing the current state.
And finally, configuration auditing. This is about checking reality matches the paperwork, verifying that the physical system, the functional system out there on the tracks, the as-built, actually aligns perfectly with the as-designed and currently approved configuration documentation.
Closing the loop, making sure the map matches the territory. And who actually makes the decisions on these changes? Who's the gatekeeper for that configuration control function?
That's typically the Configuration Control Board, or CCB. This isn't just one person, it's usually a cross-functional group. You'll have experts from systems engineering, safety assurance, maintenance, maybe operations, finance. Their main job is to manage that change process rigorously.
Okay, so how does a CCB handle a proposed change? You mentioned it's a structured 4-phase process. Yes, it has to be structured to avoid snap decisions. It starts with phase 1, initiation. Someone formally submits a request for change, an RFC. The first thing the team does is pull up the current configuration baseline documentation to see exactly what might be affected: interfaces, documents, procedures. It's like a formal triage. Assess the potential impact first. Right. Then comes the heavy lifting. Phase 2, evaluation. All the potentially affected functional areas: engineering, safety, maintenance, operations. They conduct detailed assessments. Technical impact, cost impact, and critically, safety impact. Does this proposed change introduce a new hazard? Does it invalidate any part of the existing safety case evidence? This is where the V&V team gets involved again, figuring out what retesting or revalidation might be needed. Okay, thorough investigation, absolutely. Then comes phase 3, disposition. The CCB reviews all those evaluations and makes a formal recommendation. Approve the change, disapprove it, or maybe defer it for more information. Now, here's a really critical point, especially for early career folks. The CCB usually provides the technical and safety recommendation, but not the final sign-off.
Often not the ultimate sign-off for actually altering the operational railway. The final legal and operational approval authority for safety-critical changes, sometimes formalized through something called a network alteration notice that usually rests higher up. With the accountable executive, or perhaps even the regulatory body itself, it's deliberately separate from the CCB's technical assessment.
Ah, okay. So that ensures another layer of independent oversight before you actually change the working railway. The CCB says, technically, this looks safe, but someone else says, okay, operationally, we accept the responsibility and we're doing it. Exactly that. It separates the technical assessment from the acceptance of operational liability. And then, assuming approval, you get phase 4, implementation. The change is actually carried out. It's verified against the specific plan, and absolutely critical, all the associated documentation, operating manuals, maintenance procedures, drawings, is updated and released at the same time as the physical or software change goes live. That sounds like, well, a lot of process, a lot of steps. I can see why some teams might feel it's slowing them down, that cultural resistance you mentioned, perceiving CM as just bureaucratic overhead.
And that perception is genuinely dangerous, because it leads directly to really serious failure modes like configuration drift.
Configuration drift.
Yeah. It's when those informal changes happen, the quick fixes, the workarounds that bypass the CCB because it seems faster, they get implemented on the ground, maybe solve an immediate problem. But now you've got a gap, a dangerous gap, between the reality of the physical system and the approved documentation.
And that's dangerous because...
And as maintenance teams rely on that documentation, if they're using outdated drawings or procedures because an undocumented change was made, they could easily perform an action that seems correct according to their info, but is actually unsafe on the modified system, leading directly to an incident.
Okay, that makes the danger very clear. What about the other pitfall you highlighted, focusing too much on software?
Right. Missing hardware identification. It's easy, especially now, to get hyper-focused on tracking software versions, you know, V1.2, V1.3 update, patch level, whatever. But sometimes teams neglect to log critical changes to the physical assets with the same rigor. What specific type of relay was installed in that cabinet last month? What's the exact version number of that track switch machine? What's the maintenance state of that crucial power supply component? You have to track hardware versions, their maintenance history, physical modifications, just as carefully as software changes.
It all needs to be under control. Everything safety critical does. When that CM discipline breaks down, the results can be severe and immediate. Which brings us nicely to our third main pillar, acceptance and accountability.
Okay, so V&V is done, CM processes are hopefully robust. Now the system actually has to be formally accepted for use, right?
Correct. And just like assurance, acceptance itself is usually staged, again, to manage risk progressively.
How do those stages typically work in practice?
Well, it often starts with testing and commissioning acceptance.
Hmm.
This is about verifying that individual subsystems work and that they integrate correctly at a basic functional level, usually in a controlled, non-operational, or partially operational environment. Checking the bits connect and function.
Basically, yes. Then you usually move to trial running acceptance. This is a really crucial phase. The system operates realistically, full speed, full schedule, often for weeks or even months, but without passengers.
The ghost train phase.
Exactly. The goal here is to shake out all the operational kinks, stability problems, maybe weird system interactions that you only see under prolonged realistic operation before the public gets anywhere near it.
That sounds like the ultimate safety net before opening day. It really is. And only after successful trial running do you get to the final stage, passenger service acceptance. This requires the formal approval of the full operational safety case by the relevant regulatory authority. It's the ultimate declaration that all safety requirements have been met, the evidence is sound, and the system is demonstrably fit for carrying the public. And holding this whole staged acceptance framework together, you mentioned clear, traceable accountability is vital. Someone has to put their name on the line, right?
Absolutely non-negotiable. Ultimate responsibility rests with the accountable executive. This has to be a specific, named senior person, often the CEO, Director General, someone with genuine control over the railway's resources and safety management system.
And they have to formally accept responsibility.
Yes. Critically, they must provide a signed, formal declaration to the regulatory authority, explicitly accepting that ultimate accountability for safety. It's not a role you can delegate down the chain. It's legally significant.
Wow. Okay, so that's the top level. Not just symbolic leadership. That's real operational liability. Below the accountable executive, who handles the more specific technical safety sign-offs.
Those are typically the responsible managers. These are your domain experts.
Yeah.
The chief signaling engineer, the head of rolling stock maintenance, the track infrastructure manager, people like that. They provide formal sign-off within their specific areas of competence. They're confirming, based on all the V&V evidence presented, that the safety requirements relevant to their domain have been fully met.
Got it. Expert confirmation. And then there's that external check we talked about earlier, the independent safety assessors. ISAs.
Yes, the ISA role is critical throughout, but especially at acceptance. They provide that objective third-party scrutiny and verification. They act as a vital quality assurance layer, checking the integrity of the safety case itself, the quality of the evidence, the robustness of the V&V process. Some regulators, like in Dubai, for instance, have a really stringent code of practice detailing exactly what qualifications and independence requirements ISAs must meet when they're assessing rail projects there. You need that independent, objective challenge to your own work.
Makes sense. Now, all these roles, these stages, they rely on a common language, a common set of rules. Which brings us back to the standards underpinning all this, primarily that Synelec framework, which itself builds on broader functional safety standards like IEC 61508.
That's right. The Synelec family really provides the bedrock for railway safety globally now. You have EN 50126, which sets out the whole life cycle framework for RAM's reliability, availability, maintainability, and safety. It covers everything from the initial concept idea right through to eventual decommissioning decades later.
The big picture standard.
Exactly. And then EN 50129 gets more specific. It's the standard that really defines the requirements for the safety case itself, particularly focusing on the evidence needed for electronic systems used in signaling. This is where that concept of safety integrity levels, SILs, really becomes operational.
SILs again. Define those for us one more time. How do they work in practice?
Okay. SILs basically define how much integrity, how much reliability a safety function needs to have. It's based on the probability of it failing in a dangerous way. It's a scale, 1 to 4. SI4 is the highest level of integrity. It demands the most rigorous design, the most exhaustive V&V, the strictest CM discipline.
And what kind of system needs SIO for?
Think about automatic train protection, ATP systems. The system's designed to automatically prevent collisions or stop trains from dangerously overspeeding. Their failure could be immediately catastrophic. So ATP systems typically require SIL4 certification. Nothing less will do.
Okay, highest risk, highest integrity level.
Right.
But not everything needs to be SIL4.
Correct. Systems that maybe have backup layers or where failure isn't quite so immediately catastrophic can operate at a lower SIL. For example, automatic train operation, ATO, the systems that handle the smooth acceleration and braking for efficiency, station stopping that's often rated at SIL2.
Why only SIL2?
Because the primary safety protection, the ATP system, or even the human driver is still there providing the ultimate safety backstop. ATO failure is undesirable, but it shouldn't on its own lead to disaster. Even non-railway systems critical to overall station safety, like, say, sophisticated fire detection and suppression systems like those used in the Doha Metro, they were successfully certified to SIL2. They need to be very reliable, obviously, but they aren't the primary thing preventing a train derailment.
That clarifies SILs nicely. Okay, let's shift gears slightly and look at how these principles play out in the real world. We've mentioned Doha Metro a few times as a success story in assurance. Let's focus on that.
Yeah, Doha Metro is a really impressive example. We're talking a massive, high-speed, fully automated system, 76 kilometers of track, trains hitting 100 kilometers per hour, driverless.
High-stakes automation.
Oh, absolutely. And a huge part of their success was really rooted in the continuity of their assurance strategy. Like we said, they didn't just hire an ISA for a final check at the end. They had their independent safety assessor involved right from the very beginning, back in 2012. That gave the ISA team a massive advantage, deep system knowledge, continuous oversight, all the way through complex integration to passenger service starting in 2019.
That's 7 years of continuous involvement. The ISA must have gained incredible institutional knowledge of every design choice, every change, every risk along the way.
Exactly. It makes a huge difference. And it clearly helped them meticulously manage their safety documentation. They had really rigorous processes for developing and approving the full operational safety cases, the FOSCs, and for managing every single systematic request for operational change, the RFOCs. This comprehensive, deeply integrated approach meant that when the line opened, the safety argument wasn't just a snapshot, it was continuous, robust, and highly defensible.
Okay, a strong example of getting progressive assurance right. Let's contrast that, perhaps, with the sheer scale of the integration challenge faced by Crossrail in London. Hugely complex project, ultimately successful, but it really highlighted how integration can test even the best assurance plans, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The complexity on Crossrail was just astronomical. You had literally dozens of different major contractors supplying everything, new trains, new signaling systems, platform screen doors, power systems, all needing to work together seamlessly, often interacting with existing legacy systems deep underground with huge challenges like electromagnetic compatibility.
And that's what led to the integration testing time doubling, from 15 months to 30.
That was a major factor, yes. It wasn't primarily about digging the tunnels. It was about making all these complex, software-heavy systems from different suppliers talk to each other reliably and safely. Every software iteration, every interface tweak required more testing, more validation, more assurance evidence. It's a classic demonstration of integration risk.
So with all those different contractors, all those moving parts, how do they possibly maintain central control over tracking hazards? How did they stop risks falling down the gaps between suppliers?
They had to rely very heavily on centralized traceability tools, using specialized requirements management databases, things like DOORS, to manage what they called their project-wide hazard record, PWHR.
Okay.
This PWHR essentially became the single source of truth. It recorded every single hazard identified anywhere across the project, across any contractor interface. It tracked the assessed risk level, documented the required control measures, clearly assigned responsibility for implementing those controls, and critically linked to the V&V evidence that proved the control was effective. In a project that complex, it was really the only way to maintain that essential traceability and ensure overall system safety.
Centralized database, strict process. Got it. Now, the really sobering lessons often come not from success, but from failure.
Right.
We need to look at what happens when V&V and, crucially, configuration management fail out in the operational railway. The UK's Rail Accident Investigation Branch, RAIB, their reports must provide stark evidence here.
They do, tragically so. These investigations aren't academic exercises. They underline that assurance failures have real-world, often fatal consequences. Looking back at RAIB reports from, say, the 2012 to 2016 period, you see repeated examples of systematic failures in managing known risks or defects.
Known risks, so the information was there.
Often, yes. For instance, in the Hanksworth derailment investigation back in 2015 and other incidents around that time, like near Paddington, investigators found cases where long-standing known track defects or component degradation issues had been documented. But no effective, systematic corrective action had actually been taken or properly managed through to closure. It showed a breakdown not just in identifying the hazard, but in the management control loop, ensuring the fix was implemented and verified.
So the problem wasn't necessarily a lack of knowledge, but a failure of process discipline, a failure to follow through on the assurance and maintenance management cycle.
Precisely that. And another example, the Reading West freight derailment in 2013. A complex event. Factors included track geometry and how containers were loaded unevenly on the wagons. The investigation found that the freight operators hadn't formally risk assessed or implemented adequate controls specifically for managing the risks of asymmetrical loading, even though it was a known potential issue in the industry. The hazard wasn't systematically addressed in their safety case.
Identified, but not properly closed out.
Right. The loop wasn't closed. And perhaps the most damning statistic, directly relevant to our discussion today on CM, came from REIB's analysis of that period.
What was that?
They found that a staggering 19% of the incidents they investigated involved the unintended consequences of technical changes.
Wow, nearly 1 in 5.
Yes, 19%. That is the direct measurable result of poor safety validation of a change or inadequate configuration management discipline. A new system installed without fully understanding its impact on an older interface nearby. An informal software patch put in without full regression testing or CCB approval. These aren't theoretical risks. These are the real-world consequences of configuration drift and poor change control.
That statistic alone feels like the ultimate argument against ever viewing configuration management as just bureaucratic overhead.
It absolutely is. It's the discipline process that prevents those kinds of accidents. It saves lives.
Okay, let's pivot now and look to the future. The industry is clearly moving fast towards, well, Railway 4.0. We're talking full automation, ubiquitous IoT sensors, maybe artificial intelligence playing a bigger role. How do these emerging technologies challenge these traditional assurance principles we've been discussing?
Oh, they throw up huge challenges. Monumental ones, really. First and foremost, you have to talk about cybersecurity integration.
Right, not just physical safety anymore.
Exactly. Traditional safety cases mostly worried about random hardware failures, maybe systematic design errors in the code now. A modern safety case absolutely must rigorously address the risk of malicious intrusion of cyber-physical attacks. A vulnerability in the communication network is now a direct safety threat. Validation has to expand significantly to include things like penetration testing, security hardening, ongoing monitoring.
Whole new dimension of failure modes. And what about validating systems that aren't strictly deterministic? You mentioned AI, machine learning, systems that learn and adapt, that show emergent behaviors. How do you assure something like that?
That is arguably the next massive frontier for assurance. Traditional V&V, as we've discussed, relies heavily on testing against predefined requirements. You know what it's supposed to do in scenario XYZ.
Right.
But if an AI system is constantly learning, optimizing its own performance based on data, potentially behaving in ways the designers didn't explicitly program, how can you possibly prove it will always be safe across all possible future scenarios, including ones nobody's even thought of yet? You can't possibly test every permutation an adaptive system might generate.
So testing alone isn't enough for AI.
It seems increasingly clear that traditional testing methods struggle with the complexity and non-determinism of advanced AI. This is driving a huge amount of research and a shift towards different assurance techniques, particularly formal verification.
Formal verification. Okay, that sounds intense.
Yeah.
Mathematical. Demystify that for us.
It is rigorous, definitely. But it's also incredibly powerful. Formal verification uses mathematical logic and proofs to demonstrate with mathematical certainty that a system's design satisfies its critical safety requirements.
So instead of just running lots of tests and hoping you catch any bug.
Exactly. Instead of trying to test maybe a million possible scenarios to check for one rare but dangerous failure condition, you use formal methods, mathematical logic, modeling to prove that the safety property, like say train A and train B will never be allowed to enter the same track section simultaneously, holds true across the entire possible operating state space of the system design.
So you're aiming for mathematical proof rather than just empirical test results.
That's the goal, yes, for the most critical properties. And it's not just theoretical, it works. There was a famous case back in the late 90s on the Madrid subway's new interlocking system. They used formal modeling techniques as part of their verification, and this formal analysis actually found a subtle but potentially dangerous error in the system's logic, an error that had apparently slipped through all the conventional test-based verification methods they had already applied. That ability to mathematically guarantee certain safety properties are met is becoming increasingly vital as systems get more complex, especially with software and potentially AI.
That's fascinating. fascinating. A glimpse of where assurance might be heading for the most critical systems. Okay, this has been a really comprehensive deep dive. As we start to wrap up, what would you say are the 3 most essential, practical, actionable takeaways for our audience, those engineering students, those early career professionals listening? Okay, 3 key takeaways. First, I'd say, master safety case construction. Don't just be a data collector. Learn how to build that clear, auditable, persuasive argument. When you're writing, say, the technical safety report section, part 4, you have to constantly ask and answer the so what question. Okay, you did an FMECA, you ran these tests, so what? How does that specific analysis, that specific piece of data, prove that the residual risk is acceptable? You have to write for the reviewer, make the chain of evidence explicit and unbreakable. Okay, build the argument, don't just present data. Number 2.
Establish baselines early and enforce the CCB relentlessly. For configuration management, as an engineer, right from the start, you need to push to identify and baseline the truly safety-critical configuration items, the specific software versions, the interlocking data tables, the key hardware specs. Get them under control early, and then you have to actively fight that cultural resistance we talked about. Constantly make the case that CM isn't just bureaucracy. It is the core discipline that prevents that 19% of incidents caused by uncontrolled changes. It's fundamental safety engineering.
Hammer home the CM discipline. Got it. And finally, the 3rd takeaway, maybe about mindset.
Yes, it's about the professional mindset required. You absolutely must integrate safety thinking into your everyday engineering work. We need to actively debunk those dangerous misconceptions that still float around.
Like weird ones.
The belief that, oh, safety, that's the safety team's job. That is just fundamentally wrong. Safety isn't achieved by a separate team. It's an inherent quality that has to be designed and built in by all the engineering disciplines working together, track engineers, electrical systems, software, everyone. The safety team provides the framework, the tools, the assurance process, but they don't own safety on their own.
It's everyone's responsibility.
Absolutely. And the other really corrosive misconception, the one that probably causes the most long-term damage to projects, let me guess. We can't let safety delay the project. You got it. That idea that safety assurance can't delay the project. It sets up a completely false choice. Rushing V&V, cutting corners on CM, taking shortcuts on safety documentation, it never saves time in the long run. It inevitably leads to much bigger, much more costly schedule delays later on, through late-stage defect discovery that stops testing, through regulatory rejection of your safety case, or tragically through serious operational incidents that shut down the railway for weeks or months. Doing systematic, progressive assurance properly is the true schedule accelerator because it builds confidence and avoids those late-stage crises.
That's a powerful point to end on. Build safety in early and rigorously, and you ultimately go faster. This has been an incredibly insightful, detailed, a really practical deep dive into validation, acceptance, and configuration control. The complexity is clearly immense, but the systems and processes we have to manage that complexity are proven, aren't they? If they're applied with discipline.
They are proven. The challenge for the next generation of railway safety professionals, for many of your listeners, is to really internalize these foundational principles of V&V and CM, and then apply them with that same systematic thinking, that same rigor to the new challenges coming down the track, like AI, like cybersecurity. That ethical commitment to public safety has to remain paramount.
A phenomenal conversation. Thank you so much for guiding us through these absolutely critical engineering disciplines today.
It's been my pleasure. And for you, the listener, maybe one final provocative thought to chew on. If formal verification using mathematical proof can demonstrably find critical safety errors that traditional testing sometimes misses, how long might it be until that kind of mathematical proof, rather than just historical test results or empirical evidence, becomes the expected, maybe even mandatory core evidence required for regulatory approval of the most critical railway safety systems globally? Something to think about. Keep learning, keep questioning, and always, always design safety first. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Thanks for listening to Safe Tracks, the Systems Safety Assurance podcast. Here, we talk all about how safety assurance keeps our railways running safely, smoothly, and reliably every single day. If you're curious about RAM management, RAM analysis, and how reliability is actually calculated, check out the RAMs Ready podcast playlist on this channel. It's packed with great insights. And hey, don't forget to subscribe and tap the notification bell so you'll know the moment a new episode is out. Until next time, stay safe, stay assured.